testing what we're doing. Yeah, we're testing the equipment. Oh, yeah.
What the fuck is this, Andy?
This is Heavy Board. My name's Andrew Whitstat.
And I'm Sophie Weiner.
Whew. Episode 3. So I just brought out the alcohol. Macallan 12 year. Basic bitch as far as scotch goes, but it's affordable.
I'm drinking this really gross rosé that my friend's brother gave to me. It's the only wine I have. It's the only alcohol I have. So, it's what we're doing.
Yo, rosés are hot right now.
I'm fine with rosé. I just don't like it sweet. I don't like really sweet wine.
I used to not like sweet wine either until my wife became a wine expert. Well, it's because you have to get the right kind. Like, it's like,
I mean, like, it's fucking sweet. Like the dumb shit. I mean, do rich people, like, drink fancy sweet wines?
yes, I was going to say it has to
Or
be
just, like, straight up
the
sugar?
cheap sweet wines are usually disgusting. So if you get like a Riesling and you're getting like a very cheap Riesling,
This is not good.
yeah, it's going to be not so good. But if you buy like, and I don't even mean super expensive, so if you go like the $20 range or above per bottle, which I know is expensive to most people for a bottle. Oh, whatever, dude. Adults, if you're an adult, you're buying wine, like $20 is not a
I
big deal.
Oh, dude, I always go bottom shelf.
Really?
I always go bottom shelf. I try to spend as little as possible, unless I'm like really treating myself for some reason. But even that's usually like 11, $12. There's this one wine that's like decent. It's like not, I don't even fucking remember what it's called. But it was like okay. I got it from the place next to Eddie's by my parents for I think like $14 or something. And the Eddie's here had it and it had been like bumped up to like $17. I was like, fuck you.
Yeah, everything's gone up in price. But dude, that's the thing. Yeah, I think the average person spends like $13.99 on like a bottle of wine. I always try to convince as many people as I can now that I've seen the light that if you're just willing to spend like $20 to $35, it's such a
Oh
better
yeah.
experience. Like it's such a better.
Yeah. And if you go to France, you can get a really good wine
Well,
for like
yeah.
$6.
What's the thing is that you're getting the same wine, but here it'd be 20 because you're paying all the fucking import shit and like taxes and whatever it costs to transfer that
You
six
can't
dollar
even buy
bottle.
shitty wine for $6.
Yeah, I'm just sticking to the basic bitch scotch.
Well, I did very little to prepare.
Yeah, me too.
So
Well, that's
I'm
not true. I
going
did a lot. It
to,
was just a
to
while
guide.
ago.
So I made like my 3 notes and I'm going to let you.
I didn't have as many notes on this as I did in Mirth or Bloom.
Yeah, good.
Uh, all right, so welcome listeners to the third episode of Heavy Board. And as promised, we're going over Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. I guess we'll just do his little bio in the novel here. Kazuo Ishiguro is the author of 7 other novels, including Never Let Me Go, many of which have been adapted into films. Ishiguro's work has been translated into 40 languages, blah, blah, blah. He's won many honors, including the Booker Prize, big deal, the Order of the British Empire for service to literature, and the French decoration. I don't even know. I'm not going to even try to say that, dude. I mean, I'm just going to embarrass myself. And then
My
I guess
bio is much, much shorter than yours.
I'm just reading from the book, dude.
Yeah. I mean, mine and my book is much, much shorter.
Oh, we should get into that. Which versions? Okay. And in 2017, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Uh, I mean, would you call that the most prestigious honor in literature? So
Which one?
The Nobel.
I mean, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, what's a step below that? Like a Guggenheim?
Well, Nobel, I think, is more about like career, like lifetime. I don't think they give it out for one particular book or.
You're right. They don't. They give it to Bob Dylan.
Yeah, oh God. Fucking the
They
note. All
don't
right.
give it out for a book.
God damn it. All right. If we're going to get into we mentioned it, we'll have to talk about it. Well, we don't,
Do
but
we?
I'm going to. Yeah. I'm going to fucking just say my piece about this and people can bitch about it. Fucking Bob Dylan getting the Nobel was one of the biggest insults to the art of poetry I had ever seen given out by a prestigious committee like that. That means a group of fucking writers. Like, was it even writers? Like, a group of fucking writers sat around and were like, you know who we should really honor this year for their poetry? You know who we should do? Oh, fucking Bob Dylan. Fucking Bob Dylan. A fucking folk singer. There's no other poet we could have given this. Are you fucking kidding me? You fucking kidding me? God. I can't.
Boo-hoo.
Yeah, I mean, it pisses me off, man.
I
That's all
don't.
I can say about it.
I just don't care. I think it's silly. I think a bunch of people were like, he might die soon.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, let's give it to him.
I think
It's
it.
basically poetry.
Yeah. Well, it's only poetry if you. Yeah, but it's like it's not. If we're gonna call that poetry, well, okay, then it's not that
I mean,
good.
I'm
Like,
not.
yeah,
I
exactly.
wouldn't.
Like, even if we did, like, it's not that good.
Great songwriter.
Yeah. Although I'm not a huge Bob Dylan fan overall. I know Soph is.
Yeah, big fan.
Yeah. So maybe that's why I get more pissed off about it.
Yeah. I love his like purposefully nasal kind of asshole voice.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has some bangers, dude. Some undeniably great songs. Like, there's no denying.
Yeah, we gotta stop talking about this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We gotta stop talking about Bob Dylan. So, remains of the day.
Fucking Nobel
Uh,
Prize. Anyway, yeah, the Nobel's fucking prestigious. Uh, I'd never read this book. I have the vintage paperback.
yeah, which one won the Nobel? Or did he just win the
I think
Nobel?
he
It was
just won
just
it,
like,
right? It's just for a
yeah, I
body
don't
of
fucking
work.
even know how that shit works. Yeah, I guess. What did this one win? The Booker Prize?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, the 1989 Booker Prize.
What version did you read?
So I have the Vintage International paperback.
That's the same as me, but I think it's different printings.
Yeah, uh what year do you have?
Damn title page.
Yeah, mine just says 89. Oh,
It's
wait. No. Yeah, I don't fucking know.
copyright says 89.
Who cares?
Yeah. I guess the pages should be slightly off. All right.
So, I think we should probably mention sort of the mode in which it was written. So, I mean, well, do you want to describe it or do you want me to?
You go on.
So I mean, it's written in the present tense, right? But it's all sort of, essentially all narration, right?
Yeah,
Like
it
it's
is.
all narrated memory, and then we get scenes, um, where the narrator is like remembering shit that's happening in the past and it's being presented to us as if it's happening in the present. And that's pretty much the entire novel. So that can make it uh, uh, a little bit of a slog for some people. Um,
Yeah.
you found it boring. I like it anyway,
Well, I had never read this book before.
but it is kind of boring.
Uh, I was excited for it. Like I said on the last episode, I was just like, look, I'm excited for this. This guy's a great fucking writer. I can't wait to read one of his most acclaimed novels. And like, I really enjoyed Never Let Me Go.
Yeah, that's his other really big book.
Yeah, I thought that was just brilliant book. Although it's been quite a few years since I've read it, but I remember just having a great initial reaction to it. So I was excited about this one, but yeah, I found this one kind of a slog to get through.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of the reason, though, is because of the mode it's written in, where a lot of it is just heavy narration and just talking about, you know, things the narrator is remembering in the moment.
I think there's a little bit to the cadence too. Like the cadence is so fucking British. Like it's like,
It's so proper
yeah, it's British as shit.
and
Like,
not very playful. And that's something that is actually, I guess, becomes sort of a part of the story. We'll get to that. But there's a lot of talk of witticisms, but not a lot of witticism generally.
well, it's because it's British witticism, dude. It just I don't.
Yeah, I don't think we're
It's
meant to think it's actually funny. So there's this prologue, and it kind of sets the scene. And so we kind of get the context. So it's the prologue, July 1956. So that's the actual present time in which, the narrator actually is in the present. So we're post World War II. A lot of this actual story is happening, though, in like the interwar period and then during World War II. And that's a lot of like sort of, I guess, the big and important context for most of the book.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a love story, but not really.
Yeah. Um, but the
The
prologue is just setting up sort of the context. So we're post World War II now. And most of the story is going to be happening really um, in the past.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me, since Stevens is our narrator for throughout the entire thing, we're seeing the entire story through his eyes. In that prologue, the thing that stood out to me most was his reference to costume, like his clothes that he has to wear.
Yeah, so he's a butler, right? That's a story of like a man who's like a butler in this great British house where all of this like important shit goes down. He takes a lot of pride in his work. He has a lot of concern about being a gentleman and his duty and all that and greatness. And being greatness somehow by being like adjacent to other great people. But um, yeah, he talks about like his costume, or which I guess we can think of as, are we talking about, what page are you on, or
It's
what quote
pages
are you
10
on?
and 11 in this edition, where he's discussing his outfit for the journey to like go into the country. But when he talks about the costume, like then there was the question of what sorts of costume were appropriate on such a journey, and whether or not it was worth my while to invest in a new set of clothes. Like he uses the costume reference. He does that again on page 11. He says, I calculated finally that my savings would be able to meet all the costs I might incur, and in addition, might stretch to the purchase of a new costume. But it's like this level of acting out that like you're struck with immediately, as if he's playing a part. But yeah, for listeners, like Sophie said, it's important to remember this was obviously written much more recently, but it was based in this time when, I mean, there's still very much like a feudal system in place where, like, if you weren't born wealthy, like, your best chance at like class status or like respect was to like work for a family, like in their like feudal system, like serve them, like
Yeah, so And so, like, basically, our main guy, Stevens, he has been a butler for this guy, Lord Darlington, for a really long time. And Darlington is dead. So we are sort of dropped in where um, this guy, Faraday, is taking over Darlington Hall. And he's telling Stevens that like he needs to take a vacation while Faraday goes away or something. And he's like, "Yeah, here, take my car, go for a drive." And Stevens is like, "Why the fuck would I do that? I don't take breaks. Like, I don't want a vacation." But
Yeah.
ultimately, he decides to, and that's sort of the basis for the story. So every chapter is split up into like one of the days and locations of his drive. Um, and that's essentially like the setting, that and like his memory of Darlington Hall.
It's
And
funny,
yeah.
right as I was reading this book, I was finishing watching Downton Abbey, like finished watching that, and it was just like I finished the series right before I started reading this, but it was just so. I mean, you see all that happening right there. I mean, it's not obviously this story, but it's you have a house, like a very wealthy old house, like British family that is losing its, post World War One. A lot of these families were losing their grandeur and their money, more importantly, which is, and you get to see that kind of happen. It's like the house is decaying and they're trying to like kind of desperately keep it up, and yeah, it's crazy. But that was one of the things I noticed about Stevens right away. It was he's so married to the job, like he's so.
Incredibly formal and like obsessed with professionalism and like kind of detached from like normal human emotion. Um,
Yeah, that's a good point, dude. I think that's part of what made the book kind of a slog,
yeah.
is because he was the narrator, and he so rarely let on how he was feeling about
Well,
the
yeah, I mean,
occurrences.
that comes up a lot. I mean, even from the beginning, right? He talks about um he talks about bantering.
Yeah,
Right?
and how his banter isn't up to snuff with the new master or whatever, new head of
Yeah.
household. Uh,
Embarrassing as those moments were for me, I would not wish to imply that I in any way blame Mr. Faraday, who is in no sense an unkind person. He was, I am sure, merely enjoying the sort of bantering which in the United States no doubt is a sign of a good, friendly understanding between employer and employee, indulged in as a kind of affectionate sport.
yeah, there's a lot of
Um,
shots at Americans in this book.
Yeah, so
Uh,
I guess we should say Farrington, Faraday, and Darlington. Jesus Christ, Faraday is American. Yeah, so he sort of presents this idea that he's like, I'm going to have to get better at bantering. It is quite possible then that my employer fully expects me to respond to his bantering in a like manner and considers my failure to do so a form of negligence. So it's like this really formal approach to even anything remotely human or personal or
dude,
even just personable.
it's just.
Like
I think it's just so British, dude. It's just
it's well,
so.
it's intentionally, I feel like it's intentionally just so fucking British.
Yeah, and it's set at this time, like the crumbling of the British Empire.
Yeah, and he like tries to make a joke. And he said, and I followed this with a suitably modest smile to indicate without ambiguity that I had made a witticism, since I did not wish Mr. Faraday to restrain any spontaneous mirth he felt out of a misplaced respectfulness. Mr. Faraday, however, simply looked up at me and said, I beg your pardon, Stevens. I like that was like I think one of the first points at which I might have laughed when I was reading
Yeah,
because it was such like a clinical um, dissection of what of what was going on in his mind and like how he was attempting to be humorous.
Yeah. I remember you texting me telling me that you found it. This is your second time reading the book, so it's like you said it was funnier the second time. Like,
Yeah, it was a lot easier for me to see where he was being like funny,
right?
for me to pick up on the because it's subtle because it stays in that tone, you know. He's like, I wanted there to be no ambiguity that I had in fact made a witticism. Like it's so unfunny that, but trying to be like the character is. Not that the book is like failing at being funny, but it took me time to figure that out.
That's where I pointed out on page 17 there, right below that interaction, where he says, "But at the same time, I cannot escape the feeling that Mr. Faraday is not satisfied with my responses to his various banterings." And I was just like, we don't get anybody else's perspective, so I was just like, like, is this dissatisfaction that he's feeling like real or imagined?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's one of the things that we kind of start to figure out over the course of the novel is that like a lot of people actually don't know what the fuck is actually going on with him because he refuses, to say anything about himself that's real.
Yeah.
Like he withholds all of his like true humanity.
Damn, dude, right after we get through the prologue section, I wrote down in my notes, very British.
Yeah, I mean, you could have written that on every fucking page.
Yeah, that was the point when I was reading this, taking notes, that I was like, oof, 20 pages in, this is British as shit. I can only take so much like Britishness in doses.
Yeah. So,
Page
yeah.
34, where he talks about his idea of being a good butler. Like he's kind of obsessed with this idea of dignity, and I guess this starts on page 34, but I haven't marked that it also goes through to page 41 to some extent.
Oh yeah,
It's
he
like a
starts bringing up the question. Are you talking about the greatness question?
uh
He starts
yeah.
talking about like what is a great butler on
uh
page 31.
yeah, I'm a little bit past that, where I say like the
Yeah.
dignity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So greatness and dignity very quickly come into the conversation as he's sort of explaining to the reader as though in a diary what it means to be a great butler. Um,
And there is a tone to it of like older, nearing retirement, butler teaching or trying to relay lessons to young butlers or whatever. There's a lot of like, old man being like, well, it's not the same as it was in my day. Like,
yeah, and this comes up in the context of gossip. So, like, professionals who are too gossipy. And he starts talking about, like, who are the great butlers? And, like, even giving examples and picking them apart.
well, when he talks about dignity on page 34, he goes, this is like he says at the top of it, I would like, if I may, to try and say here what I think that this dignity to be. And then we have literally pages of him trying to explain this. But the part that I highlighted, probably third paragraph on that page 34, second sentence in, where he says, but those same absent attributes, I would argue, are every time those of a superficial and decorative order, attributes that are attractive, no doubt, as icing on the cake, but are not pertaining to what is really essential. I refer to things such as good accent and command of language, general knowledge of wide-ranging topics such as falconing or newt mating, attributes none of which my father could have boasted. Now we get to the father comparison, the tragic, the classic, I guess,
Yeah.
archetype at this point.
Now, it must be remembered that my father was a butler of an earlier generation. Yeah, I mean, this is like an important conversation that keeps coming up um, throughout the book. This idea of greatness and professionalism and dignity as being a really important component of what he understands greatness to be, and ultimately, like, how he understands his father, or what he saw as greatness in his father. So his father ends up coming up a lot as an example.
Well, that's the thing, yeah, because it was a class thing, particularly in his father's generation, because of this feudal-like system that was being run over there.
Well, yeah, and they were, butlers at the same house.
Yeah. And it was like, it was this generational thing too. Like, that wasn't like unusual. It was like if you were born into this aristocracy, if you were the butler, you were still, more higher up in the status hierarchy, than somebody who was just whatever, farming or whatever.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
was something you could like, you would want your children to like, whatever.
yeah, and he tells a story that his father tells him. I'm on page 36. He says, I believe the telling and retelling of this story was as close as my father ever came to reflecting critically on the profession he practiced. As such, it gives a vital clue to his thinking. And so he tells a story about, okay, the story was apparently an apparently true one concerning a certain butler who had traveled with his employer to India and served there for many years, maintaining amongst the native staff the same high standards that he had commanded in England. One afternoon, evidently, this butler had entered the dining room to make sure all was well for dinner when he noticed a tiger languishing beneath the dining table. The butler had left the dining room quietly, taking care to close the doors behind him, and proceeded calmly to the drawing room where his employer was taking tea with a number of visitors. There he attracted his employer's attention with a polite cough, then whispered in the latter's ear, I'm very sorry, sir, but there appears to be a tiger in the dining room. Perhaps you will permit the 12 boars to be used. And according to legend, a few minutes later, the employer and his guests heard 3 gunshots. And the last phrase, no discernible traces left of the recent occurrence by that time, my father would repeat with a laugh and shake his head admiringly.
And he I guess he reflects on this more as you get further into the book. It's not even that long of a book. I mean, it's like 200 pages in this edition. Like, I read it in a couple days, even though I was a little, kind of a slog for me. But so it's a pretty readable book. He's got a very readable style. Like his writing style is very, you move through it very seamlessly. It's like, you just ride the wave. But when he talks about like, or Stevens rather, the character, like when he goes into those peasants or like those farmers in the country, he considers himself superior to them.
Oh, yeah.
But then, like, when we
Well,
meet him, we're seeing like it's because he hangs around with all these other people that are
but he even considers himself superior to the people that he works with for the most part,
right. Well, and because
including the
that
woman that
position,
he kind of
yeah.
loves. Like,
Oh, he does. Yeah, I think they make that very clear as clear as the character can with everything else. Since the character, like you said, Stevens himself does seem very cold and is
Yeah.
usually dishonest about.
Well, and I think that's sort of presented as like the ultimate dignity almost, or he mistakes it for what dignity is that like, this quiet butler who like calmly goes and taps, his employer on the shoulder while he's with company and says like, "Excuse me, sir, there's a tiger underneath the table in the dining room. Like, would you please permit me to handle it?" Instead of like running and being like, "Holy shit, dude, there's like a tiger in the house. What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah, and there was this constant theme in the book about this like sacrifice, this and not like a pleasant like the suffering of sacrifice was a
Well, and
huge.
restraint.
Well, yeah,
I was like, he's always saying like, "I was obliged and I hope you will excuse my whatever." You know, there's a lot of restraint and even almost like a resentment um, toward the end to that restraint.
yeah. He just and he talks about that as
The remains of the day.
well, more about like that dignity as he lays out those examples where like this idea of sacrifice for the dignity of it and
Yeah. Well, I think the another really important thing is that all this shit gets mixed up. So he's going on this trip and all of this crap gets mixed up because he's like, "Well, we're kind of understaffed at Darlington Hall. I'm gonna go see this old bitch that used to work with me because I've been writing her, and I swear she expressed in her last letter that she was like, 'I want to come back.'" And he keeps sort of insinuating that she says that she wants to come back, and only at so late in the novel before he's about to see her does he actually say, "Actually, like, I'm not so sure that's what she was saying." I don't think anywhere in her letter she actually said that. And starts to sort of doubt his initial impulse to go see her, or and he keeps sort of claiming that it's like for this professional reason. He's like, really early on in the novel, he's like, "Oh, well, she's married now, but her marriage is clearly ending in failure." Um, he says, "At this very moment, no doubt she is pondering with regret decisions made in the far off past that have now left her, deep in middle age, so alone and desolate. And it is easy to see how in such a frame of mind the thought of returning to Darlington Hall would be a great comfort to her." That's on page 48 in my copy,
yeah.
like right in the middle of the page. "Indeed, all in all, I cannot see why the option of her returning to Darlington Hall and seeing out her working years there should not offer a very genuine consolation to a life that has come to be so dominated by a sense of waste." So he's like putting, like, that's fucking heavy.
Well, he's
He,
justifying why he's going to take the trip.
he's not even just justifying though. He's like evaluating her whole life. He's like, "Oh, well, her marriage is ending in failure, and clearly the entire thing was a fucking waste."
Yeah,
Like,
he's telling
and meanwhile,
himself.
he gives us no actual evidence except that on the next page, he says, "She begins one sentence, 'Although I have no idea how I shall usefully fill the remainder of my life.'" Um, and again, elsewhere, she writes, "The rest of my life stretches out as an emptiness before me." But he only gives us like those pieces. Like the first one isn't even a complete sentence. So already it feels like he's like, morphing her words in his mind and picking apart phrases and trying to read them for what he wants rather than what is actually there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean he does this the entire time, but yeah, I mean he's creating the story to justify his going out there at all. I mean, later on there, I mean, he has to use going to see if she wants to work at Darlington again. He uses that as the reason to take a vacation. Like, he can't even take a vacation or, you know, some time off without first running through this rationalization process and how it's going to be dedicated to his position and his duty or dignity to his job, right? The dignity befitting his position, I think, is what he says all the time.
Yeah, and he starts to talk about like watching his father lose that dignity because his father works at Darlington Hall until his death. Like he dies there. Um
Uh, that was
and
the most riveting part of the entire novel, dude.
yeah, that was the most painful
The
scene.
scenes with his father, like that whole like what is it, like 40 pages, 50
Yeah.
pages of just his dad coming to work there, the talks he was having with him, his dad getting ill, and then
Yeah.
it's just this like that's one of the most like the flashbacks to the father, I think. I mean, if this was like could have ended there for me. I mean,
Yeah,
Jesus.
well, he even like hints at that really early on page 49. He says, I was so fond, Miss Kenton writes, I was so fond of that view from the second floor bedrooms overlooking the lawn with the downs visible in the distance. Is it still like that? On summer evenings, there was a sort of magical quality to that view, and I will confess to you now that I used to waste many precious minutes standing or at one of those windows, just enchanted by it. And then she goes on to add, if this is a painful memory, forgive me, but I will never forget that time we both watched your father walking back and forth in front of the summer house, looking down at the ground as though he hoped to find some precious jewel he had dropped there. And then later, he says in Stephen says in his narration, and it was there my father's figure could be seen, pacing slowly with an air of preoccupation, indeed, as Miss Kenton puts it so well, as though he hoped to find some precious jewel he had dropped there. Um, so it's weird because already, like, Miss Kenton is framing it as something that's painful. So, like, we know that this isn't like a positive. Like the view is nice, but it's not a positive moment. She's having like this nostalgic sort of experience of remembering this, but is aware that it could potentially bring up, the idea of watching his father sort of slip away. Um, and clearly, like, not being sure of what it was he had been trying to accomplish in that moment when usually, like, obviously, like, his father was a butler too, and there's always sort of a clear goal in mind and something to be done that's very specific. There's a rule for everything. So to just sort of watch him in the distance, not knowing what he's doing, seems like it would be a painful memory for Stevens. But it's not really presented as one, with the exception of that repeated phrase. And then he goes on to bitch about, employees getting married and shit and how it's silly.
And his reference to when that one guy asked him to talk to his friend's son about sex,
Yeah.
and he has to like explain to this like guy about like sex, and he like can't do it, and like
Yeah, is that during like the Treaty of Versailles? Like,
page. Oh yeah, yeah. I
yeah, there's
guess
this whole thing where they talk about the Treaty of Versailles. And basically, like, Lord Darlington had invited a bunch of people from, you know, um, a lot of important people from a lot of, participating countries in the
yeah,
Second World War or in the First World War, I mean,
those rich folk.
um, and discussing the current attitudes toward Germany. Um, and somewhere in there, there's like some important kid, some like young cardinal or something, right?
He's like, I don't know who he is, honestly. I can't even remember, but it's like somebody, one of the guest sons or like a nephew
Yeah.
of Darlington or something. And he's asks his butler to like have a talk with him about the birds and the bees, like a sex talk, and like
Yeah, because like that kid's dad asked Darlington to do it, but Darlington's like, I can't. And he was like, Hey, Stevens, will you talk to this dude about fucking?
and like
Because he's about to
it's
get married and he has no idea what fucking is.
yeah,
Like, that's how it's sort of framed.
yeah, that's fucking funny. Yeah, dude, you know that's bullshit. So I kept
Yeah.
changing the topic. But it's funny, like what it shows
He's
is this.
25, but he has no idea what it means to have
Yeah, he
sex.
never visited any of that. Yeah. What the fuck was I gonna say? But it's yeah, it's an example of Darlington, or the guy, this rich, powerful guy, shrugging off responsibility and putting it on Stevens, and Stevens
Yeah.
Stevens knows that's what he's doing, but he takes that very seriously. He takes that as like an honor, as like, oh wow, he's depending on me, even for something this silly, like going to talk to this 25-year-old about fucking,
Well, or not even like
where to
shirking
stick his.
responsibility, but like um is just so grateful to be a part of it. Like, because he calls it greatness, like these great men who like make the world move. And it eventually sort of comes out that uh, in the years, I guess, following World War II, I think, um, Darlington was sort of revealed to be maybe a bit of a Nazi sympathizer, essentially,
Right.
and was sort of shat on by the general public and was not looked upon kindly. Um, and Stevens rejects this view.
And we don't find that out till the end though. Uh,
Yeah, but it's hinted at throughout. And
yeah.
there's a lot of reference to like, especially like during the Treaty of Versailles scenes.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. There's a lot of
there's like a lot of reference to like the smell of like stuff that's burning.
and there's
And
that great scene at the end with that one guy, that one writer, who's like explaining to Stevens like that, like this basically Darlington's ignorant as shit and like has no idea what he's trying to do, like, or he's straight up sympathetic to Nazis. Like if that's not the case, like
yeah,
yeah. So like, and then Darlington kind of doesn't know how to process it. But I mean, that's the reveal. That's like the big reveal at the end kind of thing. Oh fuck! I'm about to sneeze.
yeah.
Oh fuck. We'll leave that in.
Yeah, so there's this American dude and this French dude, I think, like bitching. That's a lot of
I
like
do
the conference.
the death of his father though. Like I said, I found this to be one of the most very very Wharton like, dude. Very
Oh, it was so painful.
yeah.
It hurt. Yeah, so we get this in really intense scene.
But
Um,
even that, like his father, like when his father tells him he's proud of him.
oh, yeah. Well, yeah, well, even the scene where it's like he finds his father and I guess he's like essentially having a stroke or something and he's like pushing this cart, but he's like stuck in this position, just like in pain and can't move. And so they like have to take him up to bed and sort of hide him essentially. And Stevens is running around and he's like, I'm incredibly busy at the moment. Um, so he's like, I can't attend to my dying father. Um,
Yeah, the part I
And
have highlighted off is just the end there when his dad is. It's like, I'm glad
yeah.
father's feeling so much better. I said again, eventually.
Yeah, he
Now,
also calls his father father to his like
yeah,
you know, but like in the third person he's like he'll say to his father, "I'm glad father is feeling so much better." Like it's really fucking weird. I don't know if that's like a British thing, but that just it seems so weird. And he also like talks to his father in a really professional manner.
right. Because I guess that's how his father talked to him.
Yeah, he says his father says, "I hope I've been a good father to you." And he says, "I laughed a little and said, I'm so glad you're feeling better now. I'm proud of you, a good son. I hope I've been a good father to you. I suppose I haven't. I'm afraid we're extremely busy now, but we can talk again in the morning." My father was still looking at his hands as though he were faintly irritated by them. "I'm so glad you're feeling better now," I said again, and took my leave. So it's like he can't get out of the job thing.
It's yeah, it's a glimpse into his character.
Well, it's just so fucking like it feels cold, but like it's also just like what he ultimately reveals like he thinks is like the thing his father would have done too, and he describes it as a sense of triumph. And that's like sort of where that chapter ends after his father dies.
It's
Uh,
yeah, it's the basically I wrote down his father was basically confessing to him that he's afraid that he wasn't a very good father, and that perhaps he's trying to confess basically that perhaps he told him. It's almost ironic in that moment, right? He's telling him, perhaps I steered you the wrong way with that, kind of putting work and dignity above all else, like dignity of this position.
Yeah, he straight up says like, "Perhaps I haven't been like a good father," and he's like, "Oh, don't be silly. We'll talk in the morning." And his dad's clearly dying.
Yeah,
Um,
something you
and like
say on your
also
deathbed.
somewhere in here, there's like this really intense discussion of professionalism from this American guy, Mr. Lewis, who's like, you know, at this conference that has to do with the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah, these long ass sentences that at the end of that day two section,
Yeah.
morning. This is even so. If you consider the pressures contingent on me that night, you may not think I delude myself unduly if I go so far as to suggest that I did perhaps display, in the face of everything, at least in some modest degree, a dignity, worthy of someone like Mr. Marshall, or come to that, my father. Indeed, why should I deny it? For all its sad associations, whenever I recall that evening today, I find I do so with a large sense of triumph.
Yeah, I would also, yeah,
He
triumph is an interesting word.
Well, he thinks that he's fulfilling his dignity. Like that's what he thinks. Like he lives for this because, as we learn throughout the novel, he has nothing else. He has no wife, no family. Like he never. Uh,
Yeah, no. He lives and breathes just his professional life and is like, it seems like he's entirely closed off from his own emotional life as a result. And so there's like a lot of discussion of what professionalism is, and like this American guy is critiquing the idea of an English sense of professionalism, and and he sort of like puts professionalism up against honor. Um,
well, he considers them one and the same.
yeah. Well, he says,
But yeah, this I put on his triumph over his triumph of service over despite his father's death, which he does admit even if he's just saying it as a formality, sad associations. Uh, Even I guess we don't know if he means it or not, because it seems like he's just not even a real person at that point. Like he's just like this robot.
Yeah, and well, we also like get a scene of Miss Kenton crying to Stevens about
Right.
his father's death and being like, so sorry, you know? And because Stevens like didn't express his pain, even though we know he was feeling it, because I think it's Lord Darlington that keeps asking him if he's all right.
Right. Yeah.
And eventually we're like, oh, you're crying, dude. You know. Um,
He's just
but like, yeah, he sees that as a sense of triumph when everyone else seems to see it as like, yo, you need to like go have a cry. Um, but I feel like we should talk about sort of later on.
in his like the only thing I'll, if we're gonna be sympathetic to Stevens in that situation, the only thing I can think of is like, well, I guess like if he was in the middle of something, like I don't know, but I guess it's so drastic in terms of like it's not like you're just in the middle of something, like your parent is dying. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, he puts the service above.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, so there are like a couple of interesting moments with Miss Kenton where it's like they're constantly trying to negotiate their relationship, and Miss Kenton is like pushing to be more personable and Stevens is like pushing her away. Um, there's an incident like where Darlington essentially says we probably shouldn't have any Jews working for us, which is he later reveals as like, oh, I made a mistake. That was totally wrong of me. I fucked up. But at some point he's like, yeah, we can't have any Jews working for us. So this is like I don't remember when this is. When we are in time, but it would be like immediately before the Second World War or during it. Um or like at the beginning.
Right.
And he talks to Miss Kenton and says like, yeah, it's two of, the girls that work for you, essentially, or that you oversee. We're gonna have to let them go.
God, dude,
She
this
she
is
gets all upset.
three episodes, dude, and we've talked about the Jewish thing every fucking episode, dude. Like every fucking episode, the Jewish thing comes up. Like, oh my
Yeah,
god,
man. It's hot right now.
it's hot
Uh,
for like a fucking 100 years. It seems like Jesus.
yeah, man. Get with it. Um,
The Jewish question.
the Jewish question with Andy and Sophie. So, but
he,
Miss
well,
Kenton thinks of leaving,
it's
and she gets all like upset with him after he lets them go.
what
And
what page are you on?
at the top of 154 where well, it's really the bottom, I guess, of 153 onto 154,
Right.
where she's Miss Kenton is like saying, I felt really strongly about what happened, and like she had threatened to leave if um, Stevens actually let these girls go, and um, she confronts him about it and says, like, I can't believe that happened. I really thought of leaving this place. He's like, I'm surprised you're still here. Um, but at this point, Darlington has already said clearly, like, oh, that was wrong of me. I fucked up.
Yeah, that's he like even before then like yeah, they fire those Jewish maids, and then like a year later he just is like, yeah, it was wrong, like.
Yeah.
But it
Um,
is this kind of like what on what I'm right when she's talking about Ruth and Sarah leaving the when they then they fire the Jewish housemaids for because they're anti-Semitic or whatever. There's when she's asking him, why, Mr. Stevens, why do you always have to pretend?
yeah, that's the important part of
Yeah,
this whole thing, I think. Like, because she's basically saying, like, he's like, oh, yeah, well, he expresses how incredibly unfortunate it was that, he made this decision. So it's always put in the language of, like, oh, it was unfortunate
yeah, it's very British.
and it was like a terrible misunderstanding. And Miss Kenton says, as I recall, you thought it was only right and proper that Ruth and Sarah be there packing. You were positively cheerful about it because Stevens is now being like, oh, well, it was a terrible mistake and it was very unfortunate. And, I'm so glad it's been put right, which it hasn't. Like, it hasn't been put right. Um,
And
and And so she gets fed up and she's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, that is not what you presented at the time. You only changed your mind because Darlington did.
right.
And so that's when she was like, why do you always have to pretend? And like, is so fed up. And I think that's when sort of she comes to her boiling point.
And this idea of like pretending, this playing the part that one is supposed to play is like the stressing theme of all this, right? Like he literally, I think the Stevens character, I mean, we have to take his word for it. That's all we have here. I mean, obviously it's fictional words, so whatever, but he probably actually does believe that it was put right, because
Yeah.
he believes that, you know,
Well, that's his problem. He's all too
yeah,
willing to believe anything that because he believes Darlington to be a great man, because he believes his father to be a great butler who worked for a great man and that he should follow in his footsteps, that like he says over and over again he shouldn't pretend to like, meddle in the
but even
affairs of important people.
even more
So
than
like on
that,
occasion they'll ask him his like input and he'll be like, "Oh, no, 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 no."
even more than
And they
that,
make a mockery of him
he
at some
does it
point.
he does it because he believes that's what a great butler is supposed to do. Like it's there's no like he's I guess that's why he comes off as so cold, is because maybe it is just like a cold, like it's the belief that like this he's fulfilling an obligation that he feels is required, or at least his position requires him. uh
Yeah.
so to disagree with Darlington or the head of house would be unbecoming of a dignified butler, if you're
Yeah,
gonna.
but he doesn't even consider that a possibility that they're wrong, right? Like
Right. Well, because
he
that would be beneath him. He would
defaults to
consider
their
that.
position because he genuinely believes that they have the correct position because they are more informed and generally, you know, somehow better or above him, which
Well,
is not how he frames it, but is like
right.
what the assumption is.
Or like that's what's required. It's
But he
of.
never anywhere gives any hint that at any given moment he really disagrees with Darlington,
Right.
regardless of how much Darlington might change his mind on a specific issue. he always just agrees with him. He's like, yeah, well, it was surely the correct decision. It was wise, and I'm sure he made it with great care, and I agree with him.
Yeah. And this the idea of pretending and playing the part, and I always bring back that word, that choice of word, costume, where he just is referencing. I mean, yeah, like that choice of words for your what you're supposed to wear.
Yeah, well, it's costume, it's like pretending, and it's also a sense of responsibility. Like that's um he always brings up responsibility.
Yeah, a butler of any quality must be seen to inhabit his role utterly and fully. He cannot be seen casting it aside one moment, simply to don it again the next, as though it were nothing more than a pantomime costume.
Yeah. Well, and there's like it's also, he narrates in a very removed way. He uses one in place of like I.
Well, right after
One
that,
realizes with hindsight.
what's what I
Right.
mean? Like, I mean, this guy's like autistic or something.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem awkward as shit. Like when
Yeah,
he gets stuck, like when the car runs out of fuel on his drive and he gets stuck and he has to like stay with these, like, I don't know, what would you call it? Country types.
yeah. But he says in
That
that
was
one
like a moment where I was like, oh, Stevens, you're such a big bitch.
on page 169, right after that quote I read about the butler of inequality, he says, there is one situation and one situation only in which a butler who cares about his dignity may feel free to unburden himself of his role. That is to say, when he is entirely alone.
Yeah, when he is entirely alone. That's why right before that, that's like it comes up because Miss Kenton, he's remembering a time when Miss Kenton caught him reading during his off hour, like in his office or something. She's always like trying to bring in flowers to like pep it up. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing? Bringing flowers in here, you dumb bitch. I don't want these. But he's like reading this novel and she's like, show me what you're reading. And then she seems like really concerned and she's like, really? Like, why won't you show me what you're reading? Is it like some weird Nazi shit? Like, what the fuck are you reading? And she like rips it out of his hands essentially, and like he won't look at her and he's like reading this romance novel and she's like, why the fuck were you hiding this, like, and he was so, like, you can tell, like, he doesn't say it this way but he's like, I am so ashamed, clearly. um
He
and that's when he
pretends that
goes
he's
into
not
this
ashamed of
discussion.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, he goes
he does
on.
pretend.
He goes on. I mean, that's the whole thing. So it's how you view the character Stevens. I mean, again, this is a fictional person, so it's not like it matters. But it's like if you view him as he believes what he's saying or not, kind of thing. Like it's this kind of you know limited view of his, or if it isn't, I mean, it definitely is because we always see his little fragments of his memories. Essentially, that's the whole
Yeah,
story.
I think this might be one of my favorite scenes though, with the romance novel. And he was like, I swear, it's just for the lady visitors. And,
Yeah.
I thought it might be helpful to develop my
So the plots
command
are
of the English
absurd. Yeah.
language.
The plots are
uh,
absurd and a little sentimental.
yeah, he's like, and because I should have a good accent and a good command of language. So he's like explaining like why all of this dialogue in this romance novel is like, of use to him, not to like Miss Kenton, but to the reader, to himself essentially, right? Because this is kind of written almost like a diary. It's like, Jesus, chill. Like, read a romance novel. You're clearly lacking romance. And eventually Miss Kenton leaves, right? She's like, I'm gonna go get married. Maybe I might go get married. And she's like nudging him and being like, how do you feel about that? And he's like, well, okay, if that's your choice. And he's like very closed off about it. And so ultimately, and he's aware that she's upset too because he like they have this encounter.
But it is his like his whole thing. I'm seeing on page 172 where he's talking to Kenton. Uh, he says, I gave a small laugh. In my experience, I said, too many people believe themselves capable of working at these higher levels without having the least idea of the exacting demands involved. It is certainly not suited to just anybody.
Yeah. Oh, where I want to find.
He again, he clings to this butler thing. He clings to the dignity of being a butler because one, he has nothing else, but also because of the feudal like system set up there, it gives him what he believes to be an air of superiority, an air of not everybody can do this, but I can. Which is probably there's some truth in that. I mean, you could argue he does his job too well, but
Oh yeah, he also talks about these turning points with
but
Miss
like,
Kenton.
but everything he does is like it comes from the justification of what he views as his position. Like this
Yeah, of
position
course.
is everything to him. It's
Um,
this desperate, not even desperate. It's like automatic to him. Like you talk about when his car breaks down and there's like farmers or country folk or whatever he calls them. They're like they just. I mean, these people. He pities them almost. Like
yeah. Well, he speaks down of them, but at the same time, he's also trying to get in with them because he's like, I'm gonna try to make a joke, and it doesn't really go over, and he doesn't really like their reaction to his joke, or he's not satisfied with it. And so it's just like he's asserting simultaneously that he is above them while also trying to be
well,
accepted by them.
and they keep asserting, that he's not actually an English gentleman. Like they do it kind of not in a mean way or a teasing way. Even they just do it where they keep being like, "My like, blimey, I thought you were a gentleman.
Yeah.
Where you talk, hey? Where you talk so good. Where you do?"
Yeah,
Is that how British people talk? I don't know.
totally. I've watched Love Island.
Is that a British
Sounds
show?
about right. Yeah.
Hey, you worked up Darlington Hall. Well, he doesn't want to tell him that he
Yeah.
worked at Darlington because everybody knows.
So, yeah. Ultimately, there's this idea that, clearly he's in love with Miss Kenton. Miss Kenton clearly wants him to express that because she is like waiting for him to be like, hey, actually, you shouldn't get married because I love you and we should get married and have babies.
It's
But
also a plot on Downton Abbey, which I guess they took
yeah,
from this. Although they did get married, but
yeah, but that never happened. So he like comes to visit her and it ends with like this like really sad conversation between them. So like they meet for tea.
God, it's so fucking British, dude.
Yeah, I know.
God, dude, I remember when I went. If you're when I flew to England, dude, on the plane, dude, fucking 9 hours. They give you like these tea servings, like this, like a fucking tea service twice during that flight, and they gave. I don't know if they still do this because of cost, but this was like early 2000s, and like they gave us like these nasty like British finger sandwiches, like cheese sandwiches
Oh,
and
yeah.
shit, and like toast points, and then they gave us this like they asked if we wanted tea or coffee, and like at that age I wasn't drinking either. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, goddamn British. Yeah, dude, all this meeting for tea. Do they actually meet for tea? Doesn't she not show up?
No, they meet for tea.
What am I thinking of?
Um, She says, I intend to go with her without your blessing, blah, blah, blah.
I don't know why I keep thinking of a bus stop in like
Yeah,
the
no, they do
rain.
end up at a bus stop.
Honestly, did I stop taking notes on like the last 50 pages? I was just so ready for it to end. I don't know if it's because this book was just so talked about or like so, uh, when you build everything up to like, oh my god, this is a masterpiece, and then I don't know. I guess because I already kind of knew the ending
Yeah,
because it was
so,
so famous.
yeah. So she's Miss Ben now. He goes to meet her in the town where she lives, where she's married. Um, they have a really nice time.
It's really neat. They had a really neat.
They have a really neat time, and, not a lot happens, but he eventually says, so he's like, I'll take you to your bus stop or whatever, and I'll wait with you. And he asks her about that sentence in her letter that, uh, you know, emptiness stretches out before her. That's what we assume that he's referring to. He says, I was a little worried when I read them, but I see now that I had little reason to be. And she says, oh, what things in particular? And he says, oh, nothing in particular. And then he says, yeah, he does say it. The rest of my life stretches out like an emptiness before me. Some words to that effect. And she
Yeah.
laughs a little and she's like, oh, I couldn't have written any such thing. He says, oh, you did though. I recall it very clearly. He's like, yeah, you said it kind of like this or something to that effect. And then he's like, no, but really, you said this. I remember it very specifically. And she's like, oh dear. Well, perhaps there are some days when I feel like that, but they pass. And like basically explaining to him the nature of marriage. And like Stevens has been this person that like in some ways she's like kind of been writing to almost longingly, but he's also like reading into it, not realizing like, oh, she's like in a real relationship with a family, a husband, and like this is just a day. Like it's not her entire life that she actually feels this way.
Well,
So there's
that's
this,
part of the reveal too. Is part of the reveal at the end here with with Miss Kenton, with him hanging out with those like country British country folk, with him having this kind of revelation at the end of oh maybe Darlington is really not a good guy. Like it's the kind of crumbling of the little narrative he tells himself, right? Like this little story that he tells himself to justify his endless devotion to this what he views as the most important thing of his job, which is to occupy the position fully, with dignity.
yeah.
And it's like the
Well,
shattering of that entire thing is like the big revelation, and it's through those three series of events really that he really,
I think it's really, yeah, and that during his meeting with Miss Kenton, where they actually have the discussion of like, would you have had a better life with me? Should we have run off together, essentially? And ultimately, so she says, that doesn't mean to say, of course, that like there aren't occasions now and then, these desolate occasions when you think to yourself, what a terrible mistake I've made with my life. And you get to thinking about a different life, a better life you might have had. For instance, I get to thinking about a life I might have had with you, Mr. Stevens. But there's no turning back the clock now. And I can't dwell on what might have been. And it takes him a minute to respond. He's like, oh, you're right. There's no turning back the clock. And it's just like, God, so painful.
I
And
have wasted my life
yeah, I've wasted my life.
lying on a hammock
That's,
at William Duffy's farm.
mm, yep, and that's really where this novel ends.
I have wasted my life.
I've wasted my life not fucking this woman and also serving a potential Nazi sympathizer who I still respect nonetheless, but you know, I was, we were great men.
Indeed.
And
It's
there's, of course, the final passage where he mentions the remains of the day.
yeah, it's a good title.
Yeah, it is a good title.
He's got a good
Yeah, he's like
style.
still in the town and he's like he's waiting for the pier lights to light up. And he's like watching people be in groups together and like
God,
socializing and being excited by these lights.
makes
And
me.
he's like, ugh, it's just so
Uh,
soul crushing.
I'll tell you, dude, it makes me think of Gatsby. This fucking these goddamn lights on piers, dude. They're just every
Yeah.
time it shows up. One, it's a great way to end something, just because that image is so clear to most people. I feel like, and it's just such a that longing of looking at like this kind of lights over the bay or lights on the pier. Or there's a
In the day.
reliability to it too in the image that just makes it usually calls for
Yeah. Well,
good
it's like a
scenes.
moment of excitement, but it's exciting in large part because you're like in a group of people that are like celebrating it as some kind of ritual that he is not actually participating in, but observing. He's always like trying to be a participant, but not really. Like in these moments where he's like on this trip and progressively more so throughout his journey.
Well, and it's also this kind of looming theme throughout the whole thing, where it's like he's nearing the age of retirement. Like he's nearing the age where he's no longer going to work. Uh,
Or be useful, or is
right.
like on, getting to the place where he's like getting old enough that he's going to become his father soon.
Do we know how old Ishiguro was when he wrote this? He wasn't that old, right? He was like maybe
I don't
40.
know. I don't
I
know.
think he's in his
It was
60s
published in
now.
89.
Yeah, but I think Ishiguro's in like his 60s or something now. Like he's, so I guess he
Uh,
was probably 30s, 40s then. Like,
he was born, yeah, so he's 66 now. He was born in 54.
so
Let's
this
see.
is like, yeah. I mean, this kind of end of career. I haven't really looked up any interviews or anything, and that would be
He
interesting.
was
I guess.
35 when this was published.
Okay, so he probably wrote it even when he was younger. So yeah, this is. I mean, he's a great writer. I mean, his style is really, it's good. I wasn't a huge fan of this book just because I found it little bit of a
Yeah, he has
slog.
a new book that just came out this year called Clara and the Sun, or Clara and the Sun. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce her name.
Check that one out. That'd be good.
Yeah, check it out. Um, I still have to read Never Let Me Go, but that's his other really big one that everyone talks about and
I think
loves.
that's it. I mean, I haven't read all his stuff, but really, I've
I
just
think
read.
people consider that like his masterpiece.
Yeah, that's the best book of his I've read, considering I've only read two now, that and this.
But I still love this book. I think, it's an interesting look at like at least as a character study and to look at how sort of you're let into the mind of a character as they experience an epiphany, like at the end of the novel, that I have wasted my life moment. Um, it felt more predictable to me this time because I had obviously read it before. So it was interesting for me to hear your position as someone who is new to reading it. But yeah, that's Kazuo Ishiguro, The Remains of the Day. And what are we reading next time?
What are we reading next time?
We are reading Bridget Keegan Kelly's The Orchard. It's a collection of poems. You can get a copy of the book. I think it was put out by Boa Editions. Um, Brilliant book. Uh, Bridget Keegan Kelly died not that long ago. Fairly young. I think she was like in her 60s.
So it was like 2014, 2015 when she.
It was later. It was definitely when I was in grad school. And The Orchard, I think, was her third book. Her first, she was a younger poet. For her first book, you can't find that cheaply anywhere. I have tried. It is old, old, old. Her second book,
You would
Song,
think if it was a Yale series of
it
younger
would be
poets, it
easier to
would
get.
be,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
not. If it's a collection of poetry, get your hands on it. Like, as soon as there are enough used copies to get a cheap used copy, get one because a lot of like individual first books go out of print, and if that poet does not become famous, they really go out of print, and then you start looking for, essentially you're looking for a rare book
And they
that,
don't come back
you
into
know,
print until like 20
yeah,
years, 50 years later when we're all
if they
too
do,
old. Yeah.
if they do. And a lot of them probably won't. So,
So say it's our,
like you'll get reprints that are like in there collected maybe, but a lot don't go back into print in new editions. So, yeah, I've looked for first books from poets that like, only have three books out and their first collection wasn't put out that long ago, and I can't find a copy for cheaper than like $25, and that's for a used book, and
right.
that's like the minimum price, and I see copies out there of the same book for like in the hundreds.
Jesus.
And it's not even like a great book or anything. It's like a book that I would
Right.
normally be like, I would pay, maybe $6 to commit to this, but you know, once you hit the double digits, I'm kind of second guessing things. So yeah,
It's also our first official book of poetry that we'll be doing.
yeah, I'm excited for it. I really like this book. I know you really like this book. We've both read it before. We're not going to get any more books from this poet that we know of unless like someone scrapes up any of her notes, but she was, I think, as far as I understand, she was a fairly slow writer. Like she put out maybe a book every 10 years. Um, Highly original, gorgeous stuff. Um, from what I understand, Song is the book that like was almost The Orchard but wasn't quite, and it was the book she wrote when she was trying to write The Orchard. From what I've heard, I still have to get a copy of that book. But yeah, The Orchard, Bridget Pegan Kelly, Boa editions. Check it out.
Yeah, we'll link that in the description as well as this vintage international copy that we both used today. I guess we should say, listeners, if we are looking for sponsorships, anything in the Metamucil and or bidet area,
Yeah, anything that helps you shit better.
yeah,
Really, I'm
we
open to it. Experimentation. I'm ready for it. Anything that will improve my dumping game, I'm down. So let me know
uh,
and let us know.
get those advertisers
Metamucil,
contacting.
we are regular buyers of your products, so hit us up. Yeah.
Technically, I use the generic, but I would switch if they gave us a sponsorship.
Yeah. Oh, and if you have, you know, terrible stories about things that have happened to you in a workshop, um, we want to hear from you. So we'll link to the info down in the description for
Yeah,
where you can go to send your horrendous workshop stories.
yeah, it's a segment we want to start on this. If you're a writer or even any type of workshop scenario, you can send in your horror story to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We think that could be a lot of fun going into that and commiserating with anybody out there listening. So if you got a funny one or a horrific one,
Yeah, don't worry, we won't call out your MFA program.
yeah, yeah.
We
Yeah,
won't
we will
we won't
ask. Yeah,
name.
we won't even use like names if you don't want us to type thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
we don't.
it'll all be anonymous.
Yeah,
So
it's
you don't have to
safer.
worry about calling out your MFA program or, your specific teachers. You don't you don't even have to be a writer. You have to
Don't give.
just be someone who experienced a
I was
shitty
say,
workshop.
don't give
So
anybody any ideas, dude.
yeah, so if you were, yeah, we all have them. I'm sure we'll share some too. Sure, we'll share some of our own horror stories, but yeah, if you got a story you want us to check it out, shoot us an email.
Yeah, we will read it on. We will read it on the pod, and we'll give you a shout out. If you want to be shout out, then we will.
Yeah,
if you
we'll
wanna...
probably commiserate with you.
Yeah, we think it'd be fun to talk about this shit in most of these places. I mean, well, it doesn't matter. All right, yeah. So if you have that, send us if you have a workshop horror story, send us your story at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. You can contact us there as well. Subscribe to our Patreon to receive full uncensored episodes for subscribers, bonuses, interviews, etc. Check out our YouTube channels and subscribe there for more. Links to all the books and shit in the description. And next week we're doing Bridget Pegan Kelly's The Orchard.
Yeah, and come to Patreon. Listen to us say some horrendous shit.
Yeah, that's true. If you have like a really good one, maybe like a workshop story, we'll save it for Patreon.
Yeah.
And we'll make people be like, yeah, if you want names.
All right. Well,
we'll spill the beans if you get us a Metamucil sponsorship, listeners, and or subscribe to Patreons, and then we'll start spilling beans. We'll be like the dirty laundry of the.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see about that. Anyway, I'm fucking heavy as shit right now. I'm sure you're bored. This
drunk.
is Heavy Board.
This is Heavy Board. I'm Andrew Whitstop.
I'm Sophie Wiener. Bye.
Yeah.
Fucking cunts.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile.
No!
Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.